Okay, just to update the. I'll do it this way. Aha. No, that won't work. They're smaller. Yeah. Okay, I have revised the chart of the cultural zeitgeist, that is the generations. Real brief. It's not a political context thing. It's just real brief. So I'm going to do it here, real quick. Um, the person that originally came up with this thing, it was entirely a colloquial cultural thing. He was basing different cultural revolutions. So this one does too, in a different way, because it's funny. So here we go with the cultural revolution zeitgeist. I don't know why the cat's meowing, but let's do this. Revised generational chart. Cultural event, historical event, and tipping point. I didn't leave tipping point. I kind of put down. Okay. I list my own relatives in here, which is probably no one else would care, but only to give it a bridge so you can tell where things are going on. 1896, Estelle Knapp born. Prior to that's in the Lost Generation. It was in the World War I era. World War I was about 1912 to 1918. Let's see. In the 1920s, it's the flapper era. The Roaring Twenties, Estelle Knapp was famous in the early 1920s, 1920 to about 1925 or 26 or so. About 1927 to 1930, really, I think, technically. And that's not terribly important. My late Aunt Martha Musburger was born in 1923. And my late father, Robert Brown, born in 1925. They would have been the generation before the Lost Generation. Yeah. They wouldn't be boomers, they'd be Lost Generation. Yeah. So, according to that other thing. And he based the thing, Mr. Robert Capa, based the thing on this guy, on the boomer era, and then he went forward and he did an update in the 60s, 80s. But he wasn't necessarily saying this is how it all is, because clearly there are errors in there. He was saying this is a cultural zeitgeist, a cultural manifestation of mainly European culture. So I'm going to do the U.S. culture one, just a little bit. Okay, World War II, the cultural change in the world. The 1930, 39 to 46, led to the baby boomer era. The baby boom was a result of World War II ending, everybody coming home and having lots of children. That's what it's about, the baby boomers. The other generation afterward, the X generation, is not the baby boomers. If they're being called that, they're being snarked at. They're being made fun of. You're like a boomer, ha ha ha. The boomers were the parents of the other generation. Now my parents were older. My sister's parents were older, so I had a nuclear family, and it's different in our case. So it's quite different. So yes, as is testament to the appearance of just as an anchor for this particular thing. My brother Robert, born in the 1940, late 47 something. Ramona in 49, and Yvonne, the late sister Yvonne, in 51. So you have that group there. I don't list my mom in here. I probably should. That's weird. Mom would be 1936. So yeah, up there in 1936, mom would be also from the Lost Generation, but younger, which goes with the later one in a way, because it's kind of the generation that mixed in with the other generation. So here we come to other. These are just dates. They don't need to be official. It's just okay. Next we have the Vietnam War, which was an influence on counterculture and pop culture and rock and soul and music and just about everything. The Vietnam War, because it wasn't popular. 1964 to 75. Not that the other ones were popular. Wars should not be popular, but it led to the hippies movement and all that the free love movement, and on all of the other movements. It led to eventually reforms and such in the 100 years after the Civil War. Led to the free speech movement and all that other stuff in the later 60s. So it led to a bunch of all kinds of cultural events that you could say, yes, that is definitely a tipping point where the generations changed. So as of 1964, 65 roughly, we were giving birth to the X generation, my generation, our generation. Anybody been born after 1964 is the beginning of the X generation. Or Golden Age of comics, that kind of thing. The Golden Age of comics was the 40s. This is Silver Age, a little later. So then we have Silver Age. In the colloquialism term, he was not originally referring to a letter of the alphabet. He was referring to the lost generation from the 20s. He was referring to way back 40 years earlier where this other generation kind of got pushed out because his chart didn't work. That's why. So now you know. It's just that his chart didn't match up quite. Because cultural zeitgeist does not necessarily lead to new generations. Not necessarily. In some cases it does. In the case of the Vietnam War coming to a head, that time period, that did lead to something happening, to more of that. And the more conservative parents, the more liberal children, because they didn't want war, that kind of thing. Which led to a reverse of the X generation being more conservative than their parents, and then passing it on to the more liberal millennials. So it goes back and forth. It's a cultural zeitgeist. It's interesting. It's not cut and dried, though. It's what in journalism is called a series of journalistic facts. It's not necessarily scientifically accurate. You can't really quantify it. There are some you could do a survey of any town anywhere and kind of try to figure it out. But really, you wouldn't know because you wouldn't get that. You wouldn't really get an accurate representation. Some people would say they're millennials. Some people would say they're not. So you get all that. The cultural iconography, you might say, okay, science fiction guy's going to mention science fiction. Well, of course, because that also was in the cultural lexicon. And does it guess? Star Trek, 1966. Star Wars, 1977. All the great Spielberg movies and the great Lucas movies all started in the late 70s and went on to the 80s. Those movies definitely mentioned there. The comic book Silver Age starts, although, did they ever have a resurgence of the Golden Age? No, it's kind of in the Copper Age now, or Bronze, or whatever. But yeah, there were times. But yeah, the comic book people would say a rock and roll, as a result of a rock and roll and country, as a result of that war, the Vietnam War, led to a resurgence of that. All the classic rock songs of the 60s and 70s have a certain theme that's very similar to the 90s in a way. It's Ori rock, but it's different. Very similar. Generation earlier, kind of makes sense. It actually totally makes sense if you think about it. But it's not a fact. It's a established opinion. That's what it is. And it's an interesting established opinion because you have many would say that. The rock guys would say, absolutely, like classic rock songs from Woodstock and Summer of Love. One of my siblings mentioned I was born in the summer of love to a friend who was actually born in the summer of love. He was younger, but she wasn't. She was actually born a year before the summer of love and was a year old when it happened. How about Woodstock? No, I can't say that I was conceived at Woodstock either because no, it couldn't have been. Born in 70, but no, it's too many months in between there. Late 70, it would have been after Woodstock. So. After Woodstock. Yeah, November 70, it would have been, way after Woodstock, like the winter, the previous. Yeah, anyway, so, Woodstock. So we have, I was not from Woodstock either. But they, let's see, we have Martha's birthday. I won't read that on there, but it's around the time that Star Trek was born. The Summer of Love was a little after that in 67. The famous Woodstock concert, that right in the middle of the Vietnam era, that I mentioned, that was up there. Star Wars, the Reagan era. Okay, then we jump to the 80s and the Ronald Reagan era, 81 to 89. All the people currently in the current visceral generation are freaking out over different presidents having mental issues. Reagan in the 80s had the same thing that Biden has and Trump has. Dementia. They all three of them had dementia. So Reagan did. I mean, yeah, he was legendary for the tear down the Berlin Wall and stop the communism thing and all that. But yeah, he had dementia. He was not running the country for 6 months. His presidency. Nancy was running that country, and George Bush, the elder, the vice president. So yeah, true story. Anyway, go on to the next one, and disco. I wrote it there. Disco dies in 1982, probably. That's funny. Rock and roll and country resurgence of the 80s. Okay, so now thus begins in the early 80s. Cable news, cable stuff, home box office, or early HBO, or Cablevision, and begins the MTV era. The MTV and you get cable channels with no commercials. Imagine that, millennials and Zoomers and Generation Y and A, no commercials. That was their big selling point. MTV will not have commercials except for ads for itself. HBO will not have commercials. Showtime, Cinemax, they will not have commercials. They'll make advertising because you bought the cable service. Imagine that. Yeah, you buy the cable service, and then, yeah, why should you have ads? You're paying for it. But they have ads now. Back then, they didn't. They did not have ads. They just went and they showed the programs, and then they went on from there. It wasn't long before they did put commercials on, though. It didn't take them long to figure that out, to put commercials. 87 or 88, they had commercials. But it's interesting that they started out, no commercials. But it's a cultural, I guess, there too, because it's the early 80s. It's the end of what we call the X generation. The book says, okay, it's 82 when it ends. I think it's a tad further on, though, just because of that group that was born in 84 or 85 says, no, 84, 85, 86. My nephew Dan considers himself a X-Gen, not a millennial, even though technically he'd be a millennial. But that's all right. But yes, his wife is a millennial. Anyway, only a year. Anyway, so we have the Silver Age of Comics beginning in the 80s with the fall of the Soviet Union. Mentioned that George Bush Sr. was only president for the early 90s, and then along came the Clinton era. But we have the first Gulf War, which was roughly 1990-92. We have the worry rock era that in the 1990s begin. From those kids that were born as the first millennials, that refers to before the millennium, not after it. It's before the millennium. They're technically pre-millennials. They're the worry rock generation. The worry rock generation. Also, the X-Geners liked it too. Emo became mainstream. The 1990s were dark and brooding, starting with stuff like the 89 Batman, stuff like that. And definitely by Batman 2. And it's a cultural thing. Just the movies are anchors to this article, this live editorial. They're anchors to the editorial. They're not necessarily, that's what it is, just saying these are established opinion. Yeah. Among the cultural zeitgeist. The internet started at the end of the 80s, mainly on news groups and chat rooms, chat boards and stuff. But the internet started with it took off with Clinton, who was, involved in scandals with President Clinton in the 90s. And let's just say that's where the conservatives took family values from the Democrats because of that. That's where it was originally the liberals that had that, which is interesting. So it completely flipped. And because at the end of the Nixon era, that's where the Dixiecrats, who were moderate Democrats, conservative Democrats, joined the Republican Party. And that's kind of led to that. And some of these Dixiecrats were, let's just say, a little toxic, and they wanted to join in and stuff. They led to other groups eventually. We won't go into that. But yes, they started to rise in power in the 80s and 90s. So we have, I'm not going to go into the Clinton thing either. I'm just going to skip on it to the cultural zeitgeist. The Prozac generation is the millennials. That's who they are. They're the Prozac generation. Partly because of a successful popular movie, and also Prozac. They gave it to every I remember every millennial teenager, preteen in that time period, They were giving everybody Prozac like it was candy. Not because they wanted to give them drugs and drug them up, but because they didn't understand hyperactivity and stuff like that. And the early AMA people didn't get that. Autism and Asperger's wasn't identified until a little later, and even me. But it's like, I wasn't necessarily hyperactive. I was like, I was different. So I wasn't a millennial. I was an X-Gen, but they didn't know what it was until the 90s. And then they're like, oh, it's Asperger's. That's autism. Oh, yeah. And then everybody thinks it's like Rain Man, which it's not. Rain Man had something else way more serious. That character that Dustin Hoffman's based on. But that's another rabbit trail. The bunny trail, as Mr. Linsenbart used to say. The late Wayne Linsenbart used to say. And now we're going to go on. The cultural shift that's mentioned about the 90s is that because they were only young children, young teens, and then many of them were older X-Geners too that got in there. But many of them were young teens, and therefore they can't be the other generation. The confusion is that during the Worry Rock era, they also gained another name, the Why Me generation. That is exclusively the millennials. That is the 1990s. They are the Why Me generation. Not because it's another letter of the alphabet, X, Y, and Z. No, that's not it. That's not it at all. You might think that's cute, X, Y, and Z. But it doesn't work. Because this is only a period of 50 years. That's 2.5 generations. It doesn't fit. But I will explain how it could fit if they did that. And so we are in the 1990s now, and in the story, the internet was a rise to the internet. Internet culture. Internet started to become everybody had it, and it hasn't stopped. It keeps exponentially growing as a thing until it becomes the event that changes the universe. One of the key events later on in the 90s was, of course, the Y2K bug. Everybody in 1999 was absolutely freaked out that the world was going to end when the millennium turned and everybody's financial stuff would go because everything had a 1900 after it. There were specials, movies, Y2K bug, the end of the world. They literally thought the world was going to end in 2000, and it didn't. I made fun of that in Trans Tech, the series, right after that happened. And they'll be like, I'm going to make fun of that. Even Strabag, the Transformer bad guy, he's like, no, they can be confounded by the failure of history to destroy itself. But yes, history did not destroy itself. There have been people saying the world was going to end for, I've been around 53 years. I've heard it like 3 or 4 times already. The world hasn't ended yet. They came close to blowing up the world in 2001. As you jump into the new millennium, and as it jumps into the new millennium, those millennials are now of age. And that's where the term comes from. The millennials are now of age. So the millennials are born in the mid 1980s and ending up in the early 2000s. So yeah, so that makes sense. They're the millennials. Doesn't refer to after the millennium. It refers to the millennials. It cuts them off a little bit. It says like, okay, well maybe some of them could have kids at 15. They shouldn't, but maybe some of them did, and that's what led to the next generation. Maybe some of them did, but that isn't really what happened as a result of 9/11, September 11th. That was a cultural zeitgeist on itself. Began the Second Gulf War, the Second Gulf War of which technically lasted for 20 years. Through the generation of that, because like we were still occupying Afghanistan up until 2020. So yeah. But yes. Yeah. So that was a thing. I wasn't, but the nation was. I don't have any war background at all. I definitely 4F, I say, and various other things. No, but yeah. I'm an anomaly in the universe. So here we have, okay, so Sarah, the niece, born in 1997, was claiming she's a Zoomer, and Philip was too, not a millennial. She's both, technically, because, she's not a Zoomer, technically, because Zoomers would be Generation Alpha. They haven't happened yet in the story. If you're born in 2000, you're technically a late millennial, but okay, fine. She identifies with Z. Okay, but she shouldn't. She should be Generation Y Me at the very end Y Me when they were just coming of age. Yeah, that's that. Yeah, 1997. She's a generation. She's a late millennial. She's only 11 years older than Dan. She's a millennial. Come on, figure it out. Do the math. It's a millennial. Philip is also a millennial. Well, just barely. He squeaks by and gets to be a Generation Z as well. Kind of like Dan was before that. But. So yeah, so they both squeak by as millennials. I think it's because they're using Zoomer culture. But that doesn't make them Zoomers. That makes them pre-Zoomer. That makes them millennial. Yeah, so they're millennials. Why me? The post-Why Me generation. Yeah. So Clinton here. The internet cultural services. The rise of the internet culture and services. Sarah Lemden born 1997. Millennials as a term is popularized by the cultural book Generation X. So the cultural book Generation X came out in the 1990s. The update of this guy's book in Washington. So that's where that came from. Yeah, he thought it would be cool because it was almost the millennium. The Y2K bug that I mentioned, Philip Landon, born in 2000, and the George Bush II era, September the 11th. Post-millennial cultural shift occurred at that time, but this is not where Gen Y becomes Z. Gen Y is still in high school. So yeah, unless they were having kids at like 13, they didn't. Yeah, that wouldn't work. Okay, and then there's cultural millennials. The Y Me generation comes of age between the year 2001 and the year 2005. The millennials. Get it? Okay. Okay, that makes sense. The Z generation, the children of the Y Me generation, begins. It started around 2001. Post-millennials are later called Zoomers. There's your Zoomers, post-millennials. Philip is a millennial. He's not a Zoomer. Sorry, Philip. You're a millennial. That's good. You're a millennial. The Y Me, yeah, you're a millennial. But yes, but technically you were born to an X generation person skipping over the other. So, yeah, it is weird because you'd be technically on the cusp of the other generation. So you could say that it grew up in the other generation. You would attribute that to that, but really technically, yeah. When Philip was born, Dan technically could have had kids, and that would be the next generation, right? But he didn't at that point, obviously. But he could have. It'd be a little young, but he could have. He could have been, but no. If you're 13 or 14, you're having kids already. That's a little young. So yeah, that generation, it's a generation. It's 18 years, 18, 20 years. So it's a generation. So, yeah. It doesn't work. So we have... it says, okay, here's an interesting thing that I think the Gen Y books are latching onto as a cultural zeitgeist. It kind of is one of them. 2012, the second time everybody thought the world was going to end. Well, technically, second time in modern times. And during the internet, so it was really big. 2012, the 2012 Mayan calendar scare thing, and they read it wrong. It was just a calendar to reset itself, written by ancient people thousands of years ago. How would they know? Why were they making such a fuss about it? And now if you ask those people today, they're strangely silent. They're not. We're talking about that anymore. I remember the early days of my show on YouTube. I was riffing into that like gangbusters because I thought I'd get more views. It didn't work. Well, it did a little bit, but I was like, it's not going to end. I did a 2012 thing. I tried to stir up some mischief, but nobody watched it. It was just weird. I guess there was just too much of the other stuff. And my anti-2012 thing saying, well, it doesn't say anything about that in the Bible. No, it doesn't. And there's some preacher man in 2011 going on about stuff for his cult. About 2012, end of the world, didn't happen. Well, if you read the scripture correctly, the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, no man shall know the time or the hour of his return. It's a nice way of God saying, you're not going to know. You're not going to know. So don't guess, because you're not going to know. So the world did not end in 2012, but it is a cultural revolution in there, and you could say like, a lot of the A generation seem to have been born around that time period. The next one, but yeah, it's not technically the end of the other guys. You're snapping, you're cutting off 10 years of the of that other generation that was just started in 2005 or so. Aw, poor Z generation. Generation Z is the next lost generation getting the boot because Generation A wants to jump in there. But no, Generation Z is still around. Generation Z, if you follow the alphabet thing, which the guy originally didn't. He was just Generation X and Boomers. Or Boomers and Generation X and maybe Millennials, and he added the Millennials in the sequel. But he did not want to go on any further than that. He stopped there. So that Google thing is wrong. Yeah, so I will fix it right now. but yes. So those that came of age, the millennials that came of age in 2001, 2002, leading to Generation Z, those actual Zoomers, in 20 and later on. Controversial moment here in the list. It says the Donald Trump era, and it says most divisive cultural period in U.S. history since Vietnam, 2017 to 2020. Yes, I would say that is true on both sides of whatever sides of the argument it is. That is the most right now, right here, right now. The weird cultural pantheon zeitgeist thing is definitely the most screwed up period online, at least ever. Yeah. A part of that is that there was a massive global pandemic called the COVID-19 virus, of which several groups of politicians who wanted money for their various things downplayed. And for their own gains, and millions of people died. It's essentially World War III, but with a pandemic. Yeah, and that's basically it. I don't want to get flagged by YouTube, but that's basically what happened. So they have, yeah. All right. So we have, I was mentioning the global pandemic. Post 22, not as intense. It says it died down. Post 22, not as intense, a pandemic. That's just what happened. But millions died. And apparently the right-wingers went full ballistically weird and into a cult. And they thought, they should do their own thing. They should blame the other side for what they did. Yeah, that's kind of what's going on. That was also the cancel culture and fake news zeitgeist and height of that. The Me Too movement started a little earlier than that. Part of what happened is that everybody had to be indoors for like 3 years, so 2.5 years. So everybody was online, and everybody being online, there is where the Zoomers come in. So, Sarah and Philip, it's not that you're Zoomers. No, the children of you would be Zoomers. It's that you just happen to catch on to a cultural thing that was going on at the time and adopted it. In the same way that our generation got out there and adopted the rock music and stuff of our parents and whatever. The same thing there. We just said, we're part of that too. Yay, we're the 80s, we're part of that too. We're an MGB generation. Kind of similar, because you have a cultural phenomenon going on, and the older generation likes it too. They like music videos and stuff. But there was a bit of a backlash in there, because when that started in the 70s, which is not on there, you had the hyper-Christian right record scare, the demonic record scare. All these demon records, that new generation likes those evil records, and they were like doing stuff like that. It's kind of like now, with these different groups going, we're going to ban books and make it so people can't have of states' rights and stuff like that. All that stuff, that's just like back in the 70s and 80s. But it's going on again. It's cyclic. It's going on again with other things. It's not records nowadays. Nobody's banning internet access or anything, but maybe they'll try that. But yeah. So yeah. Once it's online, it's like they're kind of wasting their time banning anything. It's online. So it's not going away. But yeah, they're not Zoomers. They're millennials. So anyway, so we go on to who is the next one here? Okay, so we're in the 2020s. The cancel culture. Cancel culture and woke is a term made up by the right wing to avoid talking about rights for people, basically, for people to have their own lives and rights for them. Yeah. It does completely break the Constitution, especially the first one. So, yeah. Coming up with all sorts of things. And that would be a bunny trail, too. But let's just say that that's when that came out. So we have... It says that generation, so-called alpha, begin. Okay. The children of the Y-me generation, that would be the millennials, Generation Z, come of age between the years 2016 and 2021. The children of the Y-me generation come of age. They're 18 now. The generation alpha begins a little earlier, just to cut off Y-me a little bit, make them be 10 years old and have kids. Doesn't make sense. Shouldn't be like that. But they say 2010 to the present with that one. And that means half the leftover Gen Z kids, but okay. So it says like, oh, that kind of doesn't make sense because they'd have another 6 years to go before they were old enough to have kids. Joe Biden era, beginning 2020 to the present. Gulf War II ends with a pullout. But a bunch of other wars start. Dagny Brown is born in 2021. His grandniece, Donovan's sister. Donovan was born in 2010. So Dagny's born in 2021. 2020. Russia-Ukraine war started in 2021. Israel-Palestinian war started last year, or the year before last, kind of, yeah. Well, last year, but now it's escalated. So yeah, so you have Generation Alpha, technically Dagny is Generation Alpha. But actually, the little kids at the kids group that are over, technically, if you're 10, you're probably Generation Alpha because they smashed the Y and Z together a little bit and made it like 13, 14 years instead of the usual 18 years. It's unfair because it should be roughly 16 or 7. So 2016, not 2021, right? 2016, 2017. They'd be 18, 19 in 2019, so it should technically be a little later. But they've crushed them together because with the internet being faster and whatever, maybe they were having sex more often. No, they're not. But they've done that so that's what's wrong about that list is you should still be in the middle of the Y generation and Z generation. And Z is not for Zoomers. Z is for just because they're being silly with alphabetical letters. Generation Zoomer is going to be those 10-year-olds. That's who they're going to be. And then a little bit of alpha thrown in there. Yeah, anybody like 5 is alpha. So, yeah, or 3. 3, too, yeah. Anybody born in 2020 is alpha. So technically you could say that, if they were having kids younger. Which is, I wouldn't think the hard right people would like that very much. But hopefully they're not doing that. They're probably not. And this actually stemmed from a completely other article where a very gay man on NBC wrote about the prevalence of gay counterculture, and it threw everyone off. And that's what actually started it, because they were saying like the millennials are more gay than the X generation were. I don't think so. I don't think they are. I think people are more overt now than they were because of the internet. And it doesn't mean the internet's good or bad. It's how you use it. If you use the internet to do horrible, some parts of the internet are awful. Twitter X is awful. Don't even bother with that place. But YouTube is a little better just because it's not a personal thing like Facebook and Twitter is, where you're literally back and forth with your haters or your people that you like. Whereas YouTube, you can totally block all comments and not let them comment. But the haters just block them. Yeah, it's a little safer. But yeah, many of this stuff shouldn't be for young children. I think that's the case. They shouldn't. Parents should monitor their kids' YouTube activity. Got like 4 and 5-year-olds on a cell phone. No. If I had kids, they wouldn't have a cell phone yet, unless it was for emergencies only, and they wouldn't have internet access to it. They could just call in and out. No, I don't want you on the internet. You gotta wait. It's like 16 or something. But yeah, the last part of that, the last 20 years of that, you got to revise that on Google because it's not entirely accurate. So basically, in a nutshell, you take your different generations here. Mainly, it's the next two here. So, okay, once the millennials, the Y Me generation, it's mainly the millennials. That's the problem. Come of age in 2001 to 2005, they will be having children about 20 years later. In 2015, 2016 or so. And so their children would be the Z generation, if you want to use letters. But apparently they absorbed the Z generation into themselves and into the alphas, poor alphas. People born like in 2020 should be late Z generation and not alpha yet. So, right after that, though, they are. Right after that. Yeah. So, generation so-called alpha begins. It says 2010, but it can't be. It's got to be 2016 and beyond. Because they'd be 10 when they're having kids. That's not going to work. It's a Zoom generation. And another thing that separates the millennials from Zoomers, I was mentioned. The term Zoom is not Z generation either, because Zoom calls did not become a prevalent thing until the pandemic, when everybody was indoors on Zoom. So yeah, those are the kids. Those are the next group. That's not you. Sorry. It ain't you. You may have done it too, but it ain't you. It's your kids. So it's the late Generation Z alphas. Those are the guys. Yeah, the ones that are coming of age in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2020, 2020. They are the Zoomers. Yeah. They're the Zoomers. Yeah. So we cleared that up.